Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. I have with me today a show that I think everyone is going to love. With me today is Julio Vincent Gambuto. He is a visionary thinker and the unflinching voice in the self help and societal transformation space. His groundbreaking book, Please Unsubscribe, Thanks, How to Take Back Our Time, Attention, and Purpose in a World Designed to Bury Us in Bullshit, challenges the fabric of modern life with razor sharp insight and disarming humor. However, beneath its humor lies a profound critique of the relentless pressures of contemporary life, calling readers to escape the cycles of automated behaviors, performative relationships, and empty values that drain true fulfillment. Born out of the societal shifts triggered by the pandemic, Please Unsubscribe Thanks is both a mirror and a blueprint. It reflects a world at the mercy of constant noise and distraction, but offers a map to reclaim personal agency. Drawing from his diverse career as a filmmaker, writer, and creative force behind essays that have captivated global audience, Julio's work is a clarion call to reassess what we truly value. His viral essay series, Prepare for the Ultimate Gaslighting, set the tone for his unapologetic stance against the push to return to normal, a normal that for many never really served them. A graduate of Harvard University and the USC School of Cinematic Arts, Julio brings a cinematic flair to his writing, crafting narratives that are as compelling as they are transformative. His explorations invite readers not just to consume ideas, but to embody a new way of living, one that champions freedom from the societal scripts that have long dictated our lives. Julio, thank you for being here today, my friend. How are you?
Thanks for having me. That's the best description I've heard yet. So thanks, man.
Yeah, I'm so
Well
stoked,
done,
man.
George.
Things are looking up, man. Before we got started, it was like I was saying, I really feel that so many people's lives changed during this pandemic. And, maybe that's a good place to start. I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times on a million podcasts, but let's start with the foundation, man. Like, is that what happened to you? Did COVID fundamentally change the way in which you see the world?
Fundamentally, I mean, it just shifted. I always say it's like it was a tectonic change. Like the plates beneath my life just boom shifted, and I personally haven't been the same. I think many of us haven't been the same in the best possible way, right? I think life before the pandemic was go, 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 rush, 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 treadmill, treadmill, treadmill. Sort of being held up by this really, really strong commitment to like, I have to be the best. I have to be, the wealthiest. I have to be the prettiest. I have to be the skinniest. I have to, whatever that is for everybody. And for me, it was like, I've got to be successful. I've got to be successful. I've got to be successful. And I think the pandemic just rocked that to the core. And, it's taken a long time, and I'm sort of still in the process of really making the kinds of changes that I call for in the book. But it's really been a journey of like, hey, what are you doing here? How many years you have left on this planet?
Yep.
You really want to spend it on this treadmill, or do you want to spend it loving, living, and being a part of the world in a good way? So it really rocked me.
I love it. There's no better spokesperson for something than someone who's making those changes in their own life, and I think that is something that's different that you speak to in your book. Instead of being, harassed by these infinite distractions that are constantly screaming your name, you have an opportunity to wake up and do it. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the sacrifices you made since the whole COVID rendition.
Sure. I mean, for the most part, and it's so funny that you use the word sacrifice, because I sort of, I grew up Roman Catholic, and so we use that word all the time.
Right.
But in this period, like, it didn't feel like sacrifice.
Right.
Actually, it has felt so good to let go of so much of the kind of constant pressure. Whether it's digitally on my screen in front of me, whether it's how quickly I think I need to respond to an email, whether it's how much pressure I feel to meet up with certain people, to maintain rather transactional relationships sometimes, to sort of walk around and carry myself with a sense of like, we're all in this together, as opposed to it's about me. What can I get out of this? How can I take? And that's way easier said than done. But I think being aware of it is the first step. And that's really kind of why I wrote the book, was to kind of put pen to paper about that awareness, because the awareness is what shifted during the pandemic. And that's what I want myself and as many people as possible to hold on to, is the awareness that it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to go back to the madness of it all, and that you're allowed to enjoy life, right? And you can still be a contributing member of society, totally engaged in the world, but you can do it from a position of contentment, rather than envy, resentment, pressure, craziness, which is certainly how I lived a lot of my 20s and 30s. So.
Yeah, I echo that so much. I didn't realize until, through COVID, where I started taking a lot of time off, how much I really hated who I was doing the things I was doing. There's all this pressure on me. And I realized my relationships with my wife and my daughter were, they were shameful. It was shameful. Like, I spent no time home, and I would come home and I'd be in a bad mood, and I would look at my paycheck and be like, I'm crushing this. But in reality, it was like an empty husk, and when you start realizing, like, holy crap, like, what am I doing? Is this really necessary? Like, it blows my mind. And it was one of the first times that I really began to understand the illusion of choice, which brings me to this idea of consumer culture here, that you get into some of these topics in your book. And so, like, consumer culture thrives on the illusion of choice. And, in your opinion, do we ever truly make our own decisions, or are we subconsciously selecting from pre-curated options designed to keep us within societal norms?
It's a great question, because it points at this idea of personal responsibility that I think is really important. I've gotten a lot of reader mail from people on email that have said, hey, you take a long time in the book to get to this idea of personal responsibility. You make it seem like, these forces, whether it's, big media, big tech, big brands, big parties, like they're in control and we're just subservient. And this idea of personal responsibility is got to be more significant in your thought process. And I think it's important. Look, it's an important criticism, but I think what's important about it is that yes, we are all responsible. That's why I wrote the book, is because we are all responsible for the choices that we make every day, and that we've got to understand our power to make those choices and make them differently. Look, when the world shut down, it happened really fast, and we saw immediately what was important to us as a society, what was important to us individually. I'm not saying that, you don't have sort of prescribed options in front of you that sometimes you have to choose from, whether it be cereal or a life path or, whatever that is. I think it's impossible for those not to be constructed by society in some sort of way, right? My partner is from the former Yugoslavia. I grew up in New York City. Those contexts are totally different, and therefore the choices that they afford us each have been totally different, right? But within that, I think it's important to be making choices. And we vote with our money. We speak up with our money. Our money is so important. Where we put our dollars is so important. And the idea that somehow, there's this great sketch on Saturday Night Live this weekend about Amazon. It was on the Weekend Update, and it was like an Amazon woman who works at Amazon who's completely overworked, and she's completely being exploited, and she's just like wired up because she hasn't slept in days. And at the end, they sort of explain basically how she's being abused, for lack of a better word. And then at the end, she asks Michael Che, like, are you going to stop shopping on Amazon? And he's like, I don't know about that, right? So we all know that these things are happening. We all know that where our money goes affects the world. We all know that, like, putting money into some of these companies and growing their coffers and making them richer and making them more powerful is not always serving us. But sometimes it's hard to make that decision because we've been convinced that convenience is important and speed is important, and how the idea that I can get anything at my house at the drop of a hat is important. So I want us to question those ideas, right? Because it's not really about, am I subscribed to Amazon or am I not subscribed to Amazon? It's much deeper than that. It's like, how can we start to interrogate and question the belief underneath, which says, if I get it at my door in 24 hours, I feel like a king. But if I don't, I feel like shit, right? Like, that's the problem, right? That's where we have to start to question how we behave. It starts sort of down there,
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. It makes me realize on some level, like, the revolution is bottom up. Each individual coming to terms with living a life that they want to live, instead of, maybe being it is about personal choice. You should make good choices every day. However, momentum seems to direct us. And for so many people who have been on this treadmill for so long, it's difficult to see the choices of poor patterns or the patterns of poor choice that you've been making on some level. And if you have kids and they're in school and you're living paycheck to paycheck, that pattern is something like that. Momentum is really hard to stop. It's difficult
That's really important, George, right? This is an entire conversation from a really privileged white guy, right?
Totally.
Like, I've gone to the best schools. But if it doesn't start in our circles, we are the ones who have the most access to power. We are the ones who have the most access to the agents of change, to be the agents of change. And so the less powerful you get in a society, the less access folks have to really be making those choices for themselves. And so I'm not saying that people are powerless. I'm just saying that it gets harder and harder and harder to step out of the momentum, the sort of lower you are on the socioeconomic scale, right? And the higher you are on that scale, even though, the costs are high, and sometimes even the financial costs are high, it is easier to step out of that momentum and to feel like you have nothing to lose, and to feel like you can speak up and speak out. And if to be frank, if, like, privileged white people don't do it, like, it gets harder and harder and harder and harder for other people to do it. I don't want to say that we are responsible for everyone's happiness. That sounds crazy. I'm saying that, like, we have a position in the society where we're really kind of morally and ethically required to speak up and step out of the momentum,
Yeah. It takes courage to speak truth to power, and I think that so many people on so many levels realize that they're kind of getting burned. They just don't it takes a lot of courage to step back and be like, holy shit, I am getting wrecked here. Like, what am I doing? It reminds me of the old George Carlin, bit about, like, the last thing some of the people in positions of authority want is for you to sit around the kitchen table and express to all your family members how bad you're getting screwed. They don't want that. We don't need that.
Totally. And, like, I'm a if, in case you haven't figured it out, like a pretty far leftist, and my dad is a Trumper, right? And so, but we all sit at the kitchen table, and at some point, I try to make him realize, like, this is happening to both of us. Like, this is not really you guys on the left, or I mean, you guys on the right, us on the left. It's really more about, like, who's on top and who's on bottom, and the ability for us to actually realize that we have so much more in common than we think. My dad was a union guy, and I
Nice.
grew up making picket signs with him. So I have a really strong belief in the power of unions, because they really are the only way to amalgamate power among working people. So I think that I'm going to get it wrong, forgive me, but the statistic is something like, in the 40s and 50s, union membership, like 1 in 3 people in the country were union members. And now it's down to like 1 in 11 or something like that. And I don't quote me on those numbers, but it's something very significant. The difference is very significant. Like, our generation really doesn't understand how many people were unionized back in the day. Anyway, to your point about speaking truth to power, I think it's an important exercise.
I love it. You're talking to a union guy. I was escorted out of the facility that I worked in for speaking truth to power. And it's amazing to see how similar we are. Like, it doesn't, in my opinion, the left and right, the people are so similar. Like, we have so much in common. Like, we want our kids to go to great schools. We want our families to live a life worth living. We don't want to see our kids. We want to see our families, man. We want a better community to be part of, that we feel as if we're contributing to. We want to be part of the solution instead of a cog in a wheel. And I really think that, much like you said, you sitting at the table with your dad, regardless of who you're voting for, I hope you vote for a better life for all of us. Like, you see that coming together, that big picture, right?
Yeah, it's so important. And I think, to your point too, we want to participate, right?
Yes.
I think there's a real dignity in
Yep.
participation in the economy. I just wrote this piece for Medium actually a few weeks ago about having been in my partner's hometown and just being able to afford a jet ski ride with our nephews, a boat ride with our nephews, which there, because of the difference in the economy, is a very affordable activity. Here would cost me $500, $600 to like take my nephews out on a boat for a few hours, right? But here it's a huge luxury, and there it isn't. And so I think there's a real power in I think that what we really want is the dignity of participating in the economy. We want to be able to take our kids to a baseball game and not have it cost $300. We want to go out to the movies. We want to go to restaurants. We want to go on vacations. Those might seem like privileged things, but they were such a part of the fabric of the middle class for so long, and those things are disappearing. And I think that that's what people are angry about. They're angry. They're not saying I need 3 Teslas in the driveway, right? They're saying I want to be able to send my kid to college without it breaking the bank. I want to be able to, do and participate in sports without the worry that I'm going to break my hip and I'm not going to have the right insurance and I'm going to get a bill for $1 million, right? It's just the dignity of taking your family out to dinner and being a part of the economy that we really want, at least that I want. And I think a lot of people do,
Yeah, those are great points. It's interesting too when we look at COVID, or we look at the way we're targeted by certain types of, sellers or companies, or, we're targeted all day long by different advertising firms. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this targeting. On some levels, I'll never forget when my dad came to visit me. He was telling me, George, listen, you gotta get there's a big case of what was he talking about? There's a big case of something going around. You got to get this thing. And I was like, what? Where did he hear that? I never heard that. But then I went into the room where he was, and he just had like Fox News on blast, and he was repeating a commercial verbatim to me. And I remember thinking like, oh wow, this is targeted to this particular audience. Okay, what's targeted towards me? Like, isn't it interesting the level of influence that goes into targeting certain demographics of people?
And I think that's where most people are unaware of how
Yeah.
sophisticated those systems really are.
Yep.
So, George, I remember being an intern at People
Okay.
magazine in the year 1999, and I was working specifically for People en Español, which was the Spanish language version of People. And I will never forget being in the conference room where they were trying to figure out what to put up on the website. And they decided that they were going to scan a postcard. You know those postcards that just fall out of magazines, or used to just fall out of magazines
Yeah.
and say, like, you know, subscribe for $1 or whatever. And they were going to scan it and put that image up, and you could call the toll-free number if you went to the website and saw that image. We've come a long way since 1999, right? And I think in 25 years, I'm not sure people understand how far we've actually come, right? That's where we started, where nobody knew what to do with the web and knew what to do with the internet. And then we moved to a place where you could communicate on the internet and I could reach you with a message. And that was revolutionary, right? But then we moved to a place where the biggest businesses in the country and the biggest banks in the country figured out how to put the marketplace into that equation. So remember, Facebook didn't have ads. Facebook didn't say, click here to join Weight Watchers because you just saw a picture of your really skinny friend from high school and she's still skinny and you're not, right? That was not a part of the original plan, right? But it has evolved in this way. And we are to a point now in 2024, 2025, where advertisers can select demographic information about you, not just are you married, are you not, what's your household income, but like what you believe in, what your relationship is to FOMO, what your relationship is to class and to socioeconomics, meaning, you know, how do you view high-end luxury brands? Are you kind of susceptible to those messages or not? Every time we click on the internet, we're giving more and more information to these systems to evaluate how they can then reach us better. So it's no joke that, like, you know, I Googled colon cancer, and then suddenly I'm getting ads for colonoscopies or ads for, right? That's basic, right? The targeting systems are that much more savvy and that much more sophisticated. And, you know, if you talk to business people, they'll just say, well, that helps their businesses be efficient. And that helps their businesses to grow and to reach their market and to make customers happy. I don't think it's done from an malicious perspective necessarily. I don't think it's done in order to purposefully abuse or exploit. But what it does do is it gives your father that ad for that specific product, and he starts to believe that the world is just made up of that product and that worldview. And then I only get ads for the way that I feel about the world. And then our worldviews start to go further and further and further apart, to the point that, you know, when my dad and I sit down at the table, he just says the opposite of what I say now. You know, it's like I say Kamala, you know, did X, and he says Kamala did Y, and I say Trump did X, and he says Trump did Y, and it's like, you just said the opposite of what I said. We're just watching news and information in a complete bubble. And the idea of the bubble is not new, right? But I do think that it's important for us to realize that, you know, these systems do get more and more and more sophisticated. And if you add AI into it, you're getting even more sophisticated. So.
Yeah, it's really well said. And when, you know, it's interesting that we think, in this example, I use my dad as a consumer of information from a particular site, and he becomes something. And we do, you spoke about the sophistication of targeting mechanisms from big corporations. But if we could just peel back that onion one more layer, What about the doctor? Like that guy's also being targeted by specific individuals to promote certain things. Like it goes pretty high up the food chain when you start looking at the way we're all consumers, regardless of your profession. And if it seems to me the truth becomes really relative. And like that can we even move forward when nothing is true enough, or when things are only true enough?
It is the question of the day, right? It really is. I could not give you a satisfying answer, because I think it is the question on most people's minds. Right. Where do we go from here? Yes. We are past the point of a post-truth society. We are in completely uncharted territory. Yeah. We are at the point where we can have completely different experiences. There's this great book that I talk about in my book called "Winning the Story Wars," and it really is. And the author talks really about whoever controls the storytelling controls the future, and that could not be more true than right now. Because the storytelling apparatus has kind of fractured, and everyone's able to tell whatever story they want and present a view of reality that is uniquely theirs, and attract huge followings online. And there's plenty to say about sort of the value of that. You sort of eliminate the gatekeepers, you eliminate this sort of concept of the elite who's controlling information. But what you do is you sort of open it up to anybody now to be able to put anything out into the information ecosystem and to have people believe it and follow it. I mean, I was looking at a report yesterday about this idea of the ABC whistleblower that has blown up online in certain circles. It was one tweet from an anonymous account on Twitter that has since disappeared, apparently. And this thing has been picked up and picked up and picked up. And now JD Vance is talking about it, and Trump is talking about it, and all sorts of people are talking about it. That happens on both sides of the equation, right? It is not just on the right. It happens across the ecosystem that this piece of information, right, which back in the day would probably have been vetted 3 or 4 times before it made its way into the media, just makes its way. And I think what that calls on us to do, George, is to just become more savvy, become more aware, become more learned and intelligent about how these things work, so that we can call out bullshit faster, and that we become much more aware and can point at things and say, what's the source of that? Where is that evidence and data actually coming from? And we've got to be able to do that on a much more like a quicker basis, and a much stronger, from a much stronger perspective, probably in ways that we just haven't done it before.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your thoughts on, it seems to me like that's exactly what's happening with the younger generation. Like I had my niece and nephew over yesterday, and they're just scrolling through stuff, but it's so fast. Like the very hint of a commercial is like, beat it, beat it, beat it. Like they're so fine tuned to like bullshit, like they're not paying attention to. It's like, nope, nope, nope. Like on some level, do you think that what's maybe happening is sort of like attention evolution in real time? Like, are we somehow becoming more aware of the relationship between imagery, linguistics, and feeling? I'm gonna send that question. I gotta turn off my camera for just a moment. So carry that, and I'll be right back with you. But I can hear everything. I just need to shut this down for a technical issue. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
To answer your question, I am actively studying it myself with my nieces and nephews, right? I'm not a social researcher. I'm not a scientist, but anecdotally, I watch my nieces and nephews, and I want to understand sort of how this works for them, what they're taking away from it, what they find interesting, what they're want to click on, what they think is bullshit and what is not. And to your point, I think that they are aware, and that evolution is happening in real time, that they are aware that there's a lot of nonsense on there, right? But what I've noticed is that they will scroll through the nonsense, but then they'll get to the thing that they are really looking for. So for example, my niece will then stop on a Sephora ad. And she and her cohort of 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds are obsessed with makeup from Sephora. I think what they're not yet savvy about is that is a intentional ad campaign, right? That they have been sort of hooked into this entire information bubble about makeup and cosmetics and appearance and Sephora, to the point that my niece asks for Christmas for her own, makeup refrigerator in her room. So there's yes, I think that there is a learning happening on the fly in the moment. They are learning to sort of skip past the BS to get to the thing that they're looking for. But I'm not entirely sure yet that they're savvy enough, at least from the perspective of my world that I'm seeing. I don't know that they're savvy enough yet to realize, like, oh, Sephora has hooked me and all of my friends and all of their friends. And we are a generation of painted 12-year-olds because we've sort of, bit the bait. So I think that's the kind of savviness that we ought to be teaching our young people. Is, hey, have you questioned why you're getting so many Sephora ads? Have you questioned where that makeup comes from, how it's made, whether or not you need it in your life, whether or not you can be pretty without it? All of those things, I think, are still an important part of the conversation, for sure.
Yeah, it's well said. I can't help but think about Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message, and as I want to believe, and I think this harkens back to your quote about, hey, can these guys in the middle, can these white privileged guys do something more? Because if they can't do it, like on some level, who has the resources to do it? But it seems to me that building community and becoming real life mentors and models for the next generation will be much more powerful than the imagery that's on TV. I'm hopeful that what we're going to see is the majority of advertisement start looking a lot like cartoons, not physically cartoons, but the people will know the difference on some level. Like, okay, this is the man, this is the woman, this is the friend in the community that's doing something. Wow, look at them. They're a real perfect. And I guess that kind of brings us back to the idea of authenticity. And you're a filmmaker. You have a incredible knowledge about how people perceive information, and you do a great job at helping people see the world differently. But maybe we could shift gears and talk about authenticity. Might that be something that changes the worldview of people?
I mean, I think the short answer is yes, and it has to be. I think,
right?
Right? I think that it just has to be a part of our future, right? We have to. I love the idea of mentorship and kinds of community bonds, those kinds of interpersonal bonds, really being all that much more important in the future, for the reason you're saying, right? Is so that I, as a young person, can sort of look at what I'm being fed on my screen, and then look at what I'm seeing in the real world, and identify something in the real world that I would prefer to engage in. And I think that's so important. I think the more empathetic we become, the more we have an ability to speak to our experience as humans and what's going on for us and what's happening in our lives. I think those are just tools that our generation, we've learned in our lives, but I'm not sure we understand how important that they will be to going forward and to modeling a certain humanity for our young people. It's so important. I mean, we have athletes in my family, which is very strange because I was not an athlete in the least bit. And a lot of people always expect me, who was like the nerd and, the young gay boy and the performer, the artist, right? Like, they always expect me to sort of like I don't know, turn my nose at the fact that my nephews are athletes or something, or be disinterested. I think not even turn my nose, but be disinterested. And I'm really interested. And the reason is that they're getting a human experience. They're getting a human experience that's different than perhaps mine was as a child, but
Yeah.
they're understanding dedication, they're understanding teamwork, they're understanding having to show up, right? They're understanding what it means to celebrate with people. They're understanding what it means to be disappointed with people. They're understanding relationships to their coaches that might be different than their relationship to their fathers or to their mothers or to their uncles or to their aunts. So any of those experiences that we can encourage our young people to be a part of are so important. Because it gets them into the community and it gets them that sense of mentorship and it gets them this, not just off the screen and off their phones, but it just gets them into like the social fabric of the society, you know, which is not to be taken for granted anymore.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm accused of being more Pollyanna than Cassandra. But I'm thankful. I'm really thankful to get to
Me too. I
see.
feel you.
Right? What? You kind of have to be. Like, you kind of have to be. Because, and I hope more people are. I work a lot. I'm very fortunate. I talk to a lot of people in the psychedelic community, in the startup community, and in your book, I see echoes of this as well, and in the movies, and in going to festivals like you do, and going out and putting your best foot forward to help people see a better world. Like, I kind of see us on the cusp of like a new '60s on some level. When you look at the way in which, there's all this talk about AI getting rid of jobs, and there's all these people maybe no longer really participating at the level they did. There seems to be this generational divide. I can't help but see these echoes of a new movement happening. And like, that's time for celebration for me. That's returning to community. That's when the absurdity becomes so crazy. Like, okay, let's rally up here and start figuring things out. Do you see that same sort of resilience building and something big about to start happening?
I want to believe that I want to believe that that's aligned with the political movements that are happening.
Okay.
But I've started to believe that our politics have been so infected that I'm not sure that it's aligned. Like, I'd love to believe that there are political leaders that can usher this forth. I don't know. I haven't sort of crystallized that yet for myself, right? But I
Right.
do think it's happening socially, and I think that what we're pointing at as Generation Z, and they're this, they're that, they're that. That's what parents said about their kids in the '60s too, right? So
Yeah.
that they are finding a new way to define community and a new way to define sexuality and a new way to define identity. It doesn't look like we think it should look like, but I think we would be foolish not to think that it is something that is developing, right? They're doing
Yeah.
it with phones, they're doing it across digital networks, they're using technology differently because we simply didn't have it back in the day.
Yeah.
But does it serve them or not serve them? I make the point in the book that like you've got to get out into the streets no matter what, even if you have organized digitally and you have sort
Yeah.
of gained momentum digitally. At some point, you've got to make yourself known in the street. But if you think through that, the reason that you would get out into the street, at least for a large portion of the 20th century, is that you wanted media attention. Like, the reason you would go out is that you wanted the news cameras to focus on you so that you could be a top story on the news and people could understand what your message was. But if those messages are being communicated through the tech anyway, what is the value of getting out into the street? I every time I answer a question, I have three more that come to my brain. But to your point, I think that there is some sort of movement happening. It's just not something we recognize to be similar to the ones that we've known in the past.
Yeah, it's well said. When you think of popular movements, I think of iconic photos of dogs biting people, or just these incredible photos that say a million words in one photo. And after hearing your answer to that question, it seems to be like
But I think,
recycling. And go ahead,
George,
yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt, but I think you just
please.
answered it, right? Which is that I think you just helped me synthesize it as well.
Yes.
It's the biting of the dog. It's the biting of the dog, right? The biting of the
Oh,
dog.
that's so good. Yes.
No, but the biting of the dog is the physical moment of conflict and of confrontation
Right.
between sides. And so I guess the larger question then becomes, how important is it to have physical confrontation? I won't say conflict because that assumes I advocate for violence, which I don't. But like, what does the physical confrontation look like? There will never be a physical confrontation on digital. There will never be a physical confrontation if you are a screen away. So what is the power or significance of being in the street so that there is a physical conflict evidence to people? I guess that's the answer, right? Or one of them, which is that it's important for people to see the physical confrontation in some way, the biting of the dog, right?
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's a
I
catchy
don't know. I'm
title,
just
The
thinking
Biting
out
of the
loud with you
Dog.
because I'm now comfortable with you on your
Yeah.
podcast.
I love it. Thank you for being comfortable on the podcast. It's true. It's the felt presence of the other. When you're in the midst of other people, you become part of that situation, unlike sitting far away from somebody. It's that real felt presence of the other that has the momentum to change things, I think.
Well, I always think through these things in terms of the gay rights movement. I mean, as a gay man, it's hard for me not to, but that's the lens that I see a lot of this through. And I think to like pride parades that I've been to, where there are people actively picketing, right, and actively protesting, and they are carrying signs that say god awful things in the name of Jesus, but they're right there, sort of. Wanting their message to be out there and wanting their perspective known. And I'm just trying to think if I've ever sort of witnessed a moment where people actually sort of are able to come together. And I think ultimately it's probably not happening in the street where people are like, oh, I saw your sign, so I'm going to hug you now. Right. But it's a momentum that's built, right? It's I saw that sign and then I saw that message again. And then, that conflict has brewed and brewed and brewed. And maybe now that's going to force me to sit down at the table with someone who doesn't believe what I believe and actually have it out. I'll stop there because I'm just thinking out loud. But
No, it's awesome. I'm glad you are. It makes me sometimes I think it's what we're witnessing right now, like this incredible polarity and this extremeness, is the unrealized dreams of the death of the boomer class. On some level, like, is what we're seeing out like a fourth turning? Is it like, hey, here's all these people that may have come to the end of the mortality experience and they are waking up going, holy crap, you know what? I failed to live a life worth living. My kids don't like me. I have a little bit of money in the bank. I thought, commerce has told me forever that I'm going to live out these last years is going to be awesome. I'm in the hospital. I have cancer. My life is not as fulfilling as I was told. And you're seeing this like death throes of a generation. Do you think that plays a factor in the polarity and the chaos that we're seeing?
Dude, I love you. This is great.
It takes one to know one.
All day. Is it the unrealized dreams of the boomer class? That's great. Yeah, I hesitate to give an answer because I don't want to sound like I'm giving the answer, right? It's like, yeah. I mean, I think part of it is that, right? It's like you're sort of witnessing a generation of people who did stuff, who were shut down, who were then forced to sort of make sure that they went into corporate America and made some money. Now have made the money. Now are fighting over the house and who gets it, and struggling to pay for senior care, and are wondering, was it all worth it? I can't speak for them, and it would be foolish of me to try to, but I definitely see it from my own perspective. Again, just because I'm comfortable here right now at on your podcast. But I'm coming off of a year of chemo. I'm coming off of a year of cancer. I have been battling colon cancer since last January, so less than a year. But and it's been horrible. And I think understanding how our healthcare system works from the inside now, understanding how cancer works from the inside, understanding the threat that one feels to their life when you get in bed at night with your partner or without them and wonder how long you have left. I have been incredibly lucky that the prognosis is good, but for so many people, that is not the case. I have been incredibly lucky that my insurance has covered everything and I've been well taken care of. For so many people, that's not the case. So what I'm trying to communicate is ultimately when your life is threatened, you realize that this concept that you're going to live to 90 and somehow like it's all going to be perfect is a complete illusion, right? It is the idea that somehow, you know, life is about my 401k is nonsense. And it doesn't mean that money's not important. And it doesn't mean that you can't have, it doesn't mean that the more money you have, the more freedom you have, or the more ability you have to experience things. But I think we have convinced ourselves that it's the only thing that matters in this country. And I think that that could not be further from the truth. So when you talk about a life worth living and a life full of meaning, you know, what I hear is like, there's 3 or 5 things I really want to do in this world, and I've only done 1 or 2 of them. So let's get going, because the idea that I have 15 more years is an illusion, right?
Julio, thank you for being candid. I love you, man. And I'm sending all my light and love your way to be healthy and happy. And I know everyone listening to is like, I think we need more of that. Like, you know, I was speaking with a death doula the other day who echoed so much of what you're talking about. And I think on some level, what you just did right here and what we can do more of is sort of this rite of passage. Like, you know, when I spoke to this death doula, I was like, what are people saying? Like, you were sitting with people who know, like, hey, I'm moving on. And what are they talking about? She goes, well, George, I'll tell you what they're not talking about. They're not talking about going to Costco. They're not talking about buying a Tesla. That doesn't matter. They're saying things like, I wish I was a better husband. I wish I was a better mother. I wish I was a better individual. I wish I had better relationships. And like that is the sort of learning experience that I want everyone in my audience to understand, is like you are here, and I can thoroughly understand what it's like to not have health insurance. I can thoroughly understand what it's like to not know how you're going to make it next month. I get it. And that is a lot of anxiety. But guess what? Can you embrace the idea of uncertainty for a day? Can you do it for 2 days? Because once you begin coming uncomfortable with that idea of uncertainty, whoa, aren't the flowers brighter? Wow, you smell the crisp air out there? Whoa, are those ducks? What kind of bird is that over there? You know, my wife smiles. She has 25 different smiles. Look at that, you know? And can you help us understand your relationship with uncertainty? Like, how did you embrace that, man? You spoke a little bit about it, but maybe you can help people out.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's all completely related to everything we've talked about with respect to the pandemic, right? Because I think this concept of certainty was so a part of my DNA before the pandemic, right? I think it was a part of all of our DNA, right? We, especially as Americans, sort of believe that the world is a certain place. The world is a safe place. The world is a solid place, at least on our shores. And that whatever it is that we want, we will get. And there's so much arrogance to that perspective, right? But it is how we have been sort of bred and grown and taught that the world is ours for the taking. And I think that there is just that what the pandemic did was I'll speak from my perspective, was rock my life so much and so hard that I don't know that I'll ever believe again that in certainty in the way that I did before, right? Meaning that like all the things that I sort of imagine my life will be full of are not guaranteed, right? And so there's an entitlement to certainty, there's an arrogance to certainty, there's a real lack of there's a selfishness to certainty. Like certainty sort of overlaps with so many sort of not very attractive or traits. And I think when you kind of realize that none of it, you're not entitled to any of it. None of it's guaranteed to come to you. You could die tomorrow and the world would just go on. People would mourn you and then they would get back to their life. That's a hard nut to crack and a really hard moment to come to. But if there are experiences in your life that show you that, I think what you then are freed of a little bit is, at least one would hope, you're freed a little bit of the arrogance, the entitlement, the selfishness, whatever that might be. Hopefully you are, because then you can go forward and start to think about things a little bit differently. Oliver Berkman has a great book called 4,000 Weeks. And Oliver, just by happenstance, has become a friend and has been a great supporter of my book. But Oliver's book, 4,000 Weeks, I mean, he numbers them, right? He's like, you've got, if you live, he says, if you live till 80, you get 4,000 weeks on this planet. What do you want to do with it? How do you want to show up? Who do you want to be in the world? And for some people, that means I want to go to Antarctica. But for other people, it means I want better relationships with my kids. And I want better relationships with the people around me. And, to your point earlier about sort of what you were missing out on, my brother-in-law used to commute before the pandemic an hour and 45 minutes every day for work. That's like, 2, 4, 5, about 20 hours a week. Never went to a lacrosse game, never went to a soccer game, wasn't at dinner with his family. It was just sort of what was normal and what we all considered to be normal. And after the pandemic, he works from home and he's like, volunteering for the soccer team and the football team. And he's like, I'm not going back, man. Like, I'm not, you will have to drag me back to Manhattan 5 days a week because there's no way I'm going to do that again. I've been awakened for, to use a little bit of a woo-woo word, right? I've been awakened to the fact that that's not what I want to talk about on my deathbed, right? That's not the position I want to be in on my deathbed. I don't want to look out and say my sons hate me because I was never at a sports game, right? I want to look at them and go, oh my God, I remember the winnings, the winning shot of that championship game, and I was there with you,
Right. Yeah, that's what I remember. I stood up and I spilled my soda all over you because I was so excited when that happened. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you want. Like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you could listen to this conversation and say, it's two privileged guys talking about this, right? But I think that's probably why we need the economic changes that we need.
Right.
It's why we need our system to be structured differently so that people don't have to choose between the life moments that will give them the fondest memories and and then I have to be, working double time because I don't have the right insurance or I don't have the right, I don't have enough money to afford the soccer uniform. Why do we stand for a system that makes us choose between affording life and having to work hard in order to afford it, and then the actual things that make life worth living? It's not always that black and white, and I realize that, but I think our system very often forces us into these terrible choices. And we wound up making them because we love our kids and we want to buy the soccer uniform, right? And we want to go work double time in order to make sure that they can go to the dentist and get braces, right? But that doesn't always afford us the memory making, right? Or the real good stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It takes, we've used the word sacrifice or privilege, but it takes giving up things in order for people to have, it's the biting of the dog. Like, you have to give up this perceived idea of what you think is special. And you know what? Maybe you made the wrong choice. It's very possible. Very possible. You look, I made the wrong choice, but it's only in letting go of these ideas, these preconceived notions, this idea of security, this idea of certainty, this naive idea of certainty that's been given to us. And it's only in that letting go, though, that you can really begin to experience what it means to have a meaningful life. And I guess there's a strange paradox here that, like, there's all these, the propaganda or the messaging that comes to us. It tells us on one hand to be distracted all the time. We're distracted. On the other hand, it's like, fear the change. Like, I'm kind of bird walking here, but this idea of awareness, like, is it something that more people like your brother-in-law are waking up to? Like, it's so glaring once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? Like, it's like, oh, I'm aware of that now. And I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know that more people are seeing it. I'd like to think that they are. I think the drive to go back to normal was so intense. I think the need to go back to normal was so intense. The pandemic went on for so long, and the reason I keep bringing up the pandemic is I think it was the most. It gave us the most opportunity, right? It gave us the most opportunity to be awakened, if you will, to see that for what it was. And so I think a lot of experiences can teach you that. And I think a lot of moments in life can illuminate that for you. And I keep joking that, like, I didn't need cancer. I already had the pandemic.
Yeah.
My eyes were open. I didn't need to open them again. But I think a lot of experiences can do that. But the pandemic was one that was particularly intense for a lot of people, and it was collective, right? It was something that we all went through together. And so, it's one thing for me to say, oh, my cancer has taught me X, Y, and Z. And then my friend says, oh, that's nice that it taught you that, right? We didn't go through it together, but to go through this collectively over the worldwide population, right? That is just so much bigger than our brains can fathom, that like 8 million people went through this collective trauma together. That was really illuminating. So I think, to your question, that I think that, I would like to think that people are carrying that forward. But I think the pressure was so strong to let it go and go back to normal. I think there were bills to be paid and mortgages to be paid and kids to go back to school. And I think people learned a lot, but whether or not they can put it into practice now in their life can be a challenge. And that's quite honestly, George, why I wrote the book, is I wanted it to be a blueprint for people who remembered that they wanted to make some sort of change, remembered that, oh my God, I did see things differently. How come I can't hold on to that? And offer them something that was a bit of a roadmap, if you will, for how to get back to that and how to really make those changes, and how to go forward, whether it's small things or much larger and deeper things. I wanted to kind of catalog it and chronicle it in a book so that people and myself had it. And so that now, as we get further and further away from this massive collective experience, there's a reminder that it was real, right? Like what we saw was real, what we experienced was real. And the permission we gave each other to make changes was real. And I think that permission has gotten eroded now. And we're sort of just like, hey, got to get back on that treadmill. Got to get back on that treadmill. The economy's bad. Got to get back on. Got to get back on. And I want people to know that they don't have to, and that they can. Part of a life full of meaning and part of a life worth living is a life that's examined, right? And like one that you take the time to, if you have the time and you can create the time, to step back and reevaluate some of it.
They say old habits die hard and calluses grow back quickly. What are some tools or some techniques? Like when people hear normality calling back to them, hey, George, 40 hours, 60 hours, buddy, come on, man. It's free insurance. Come on, man. It's not that bad. Like what are some techniques and tools that you use to remind yourself of like, hey, I'm not going back to that abusive relationship? Like what do you do to the person that hears normality calling back to them?
I've thought a lot about this, and because, you know, in the process of writing a book, especially one like this, that's going to live in the self-help aisle or lane or shelf, you know, very naturally your publisher and your editor are saying, you know, give people takeaways. What is it that they, you know, give people actionable steps. And so I use the word practical and tactical all the time, right? Like practical and tactical strategies. But what I've come to sort of realize is that, you know, my life experience on a day-to-day as a engaged man in New York City who's a writer is very different than a single mom in Missouri who picked up my book because her friend told her about it. So a lot of those takeaways I tried to make as universal as possible. I promise I'm coming to a point. But what is more important, I think, is to ask yourself some questions, right? When you feel normality or normalcy calling back to you, and you feel the treadmill calling back to you, and you feel yourself on autopilot or pressured to get back to autopilot, I encourage people to think through some questions. How do I slow this down? How do I put limits back in? And how do I humanize this moment? And those are three things that I encourage people, because I think those are the principles behind my book. And those are the principles that is what has changed the most in 20 years. We have sped it all up. We have removed all of the limits, and we've dehumanized it all. So in order to counter that and to extend the awareness and to live more in the lessons and less in the treadmill, ask yourself, how can I slow this down? How can I put limits back in? And how can I rehumanize or bring more humanity to this? And that can be anything from, you know, my kid behaving badly to pressure to go back to the office 5 days a week to, you know, what aisle should I check out at the grocery store? Yeah. Those are the things that have been changed on us and in front of us and in our system. And our power is going to come back more and more and more, little by little by little by little, if we can slow down, put limits in, and rehumanize the experience.
That's really well said. The idea, just how far we've been dehumanized to see ourselves as numbers, to see ourselves as an algorithm on some level, and to see the way in which lots of money is being put in to familiarize ourselves with, you know, if you just look at the metaphors that have changed throughout the years, like they've become increasingly mechanistic. You know, it's like, whoa, look at this weird sort of twist of language here. Like we're all cogs in a wheel, or like, you know, there's so many metaphors you can, if you pull back the onion a little bit, you're like, wow, it's interesting to think about from that example.
I love watching advertising and billboards. I'm like, who wrote that?
Yeah, me too.
Like, what do you have to believe about humanity in order to write that and put that on a billboard?
Yep.
Or, you know, I look at messages everywhere. I'm so attuned to them now, and always have been, which is why I think this has always been interesting to me. But I'm always just like, what possesses someone to write that? You know, it's like, you've really got to like look at the world differently to communicate a message like that. But
yeah,
you know, I always use the example of the grocery store, because we have in our family no robot rule, right? Like, I don't
love it.
use we don't go to the self checkout where you get to do it yourself, like it's fucking Korean barbecue, right? It's like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not doing it. And it isn't because like I'm lazy or I feel someone should do it for me or blah blah blah. It's because like that is the social fabric, right? Like, the hello to the person scanning the fucking grocery, that is the social fabric. And the hello to the person holding the door at the church, or the person who is the crossing guard, or who is the toll taker, or who, like, those are the things that are vanishing. And so when we think about the social fabric fraying, it's because all those little places where the society was held together are disappearing. So why are we doing it to ourselves? Like, I'm not going to use the robot. I'm going to stand there and say, "Hi, Emil, how are you?" You know?
Yeah.
And like, Emil might think I'm crazy for saying his name, but like, you know what? Too bad. Like, hello, how are you? Let's both get on with our days, right? I don't have to have an extensive conversation, but that's where the social fabric is. I think about it. I was raised on Staten Island in New York. And as a kid, whenever you entered the island, there was a line of toll takers, right? And like, you just went and you pulled up and you gave them, at the time, your $4. Now it's like $20 or something. But and all that went away. And now it's just this like metal barrier with cameras that takes your toll off of your Easy Pass, and or like screenshots your license plate, and that's it. I'm not saying I love toll takers, but I am saying that was part of the social fabric, right? Pulled up, you said, "Hey, how are you?" 50% of those people could not give a shit that you were there. They were on their radio. They were ignoring you anyway. But 50% said, "Hello, how are you?" And then we got on with our day. And so by the end of the day, even if you didn't have a long conversation with people, you had greeted the person at the grocery store. You had said hello to the toll taker. You had been, you said thank you for someone holding the door for you at the pet store. Whatever that is, at the end of the day, you interacted with 10 people. Multiply that by 300 million across the society, and that's a lot of social interaction that is disappearing, So, I don't think big tech is evil, but I do think that we are being, the society is being changed in very small ways constantly, and we have to kind of fight back. And to me, fighting back is saying hello.
Yeah, it's a brilliant point. What effect does, 3 million thank yous a day have on the cognitive awareness of a planetary society? Like, I mean, doesn't that mean like we're all more thankful if we use that word once a day?
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, I think it does.
Me too.
And I'm not Brene Brown. I don't have the survey to show you. I don't have the data to show you. But I think that it does. I think you would be silly to not think that that's true.
Of course.
I don't know how you would think that that's not the case. We are 300 million people in America. And if you eliminate that gratitude, and you eliminate that, that sense of grace from our day, where does that leave you? I'll tell you where it leads you. It leaves you with a generation of children who don't know how to say please and thank you. And I realize that I sound like my grandfather, and I don't care. But like, I look at my nieces and nephews and I realize, like, why am I having to teach, like, say please, say thank you? It's not that they're rude kids. It's that they don't have the practice of it. right? They don't
Yeah.
they don't have the practice of it. They need new sneakers. They go on their phone. They have their mother approve it, and it's ordered, right? They don't have the practice of going into a shoe store and saying, "Can I try an 8? Can I try an 8.5? Thank you so much." And I'm going to
Yeah.
try them on. Oh, this doesn't work. Let me get you another one. Thank you for getting me the other one, right? Like that's an entire social interaction that has been completely eliminated, right?
Yeah.
And so it isn't that they're spoiled or they're bratty or they're terrible people. They're not. They're kids. They're beautiful, but they don't have the practice of being in the society, constantly interacting. And I think that the flip side of that is true too. Not only is it please and thank you, but then we kind of also rob our kids of the ability to resolve conflict and
Yeah.
to mediate disagreement and argument. If you're not out in the society every day solving problems, those problems get harder and harder and harder to solve. Again, I don't have the social
Yeah.
data to show it to you, but I can't imagine that that's not true across 300 million people and then 8 billion people across the world, right? If we're not in the practice of solving problems, small problems every day, whether that's you rang that up at the wrong price, can you correct that? Or you took my parking spot, or you sat in my seat, that's my seat. Those things can scale up in very large ways, I think, across the society. And we're not giving our kids the opportunity to learn how to mitigate conflict or de-escalate conflict or solve problems, you know.
Yeah.
That's me on
great.
my high horse, George. There you go.
I love it. Yeah, it's interesting. My daughter and I a while back were at like a local convenience store, and we went in there, and there was nobody working registers. So like they really, I used to go to this corner store all the time, and they really wanted people to use their machines. They really wanted to, so they cut all their staff, and they had like one person that was just like mediating between the machines. And I was buying my wife some champagne, and I was there with my daughter. We were checking stuff out, and it's like, you have to have somebody come over here and like, put in their code or whatever, because it was 21 and over. And like my daughter already knows I have a huge problem with these machines. So there's like this huge line of people. It was so inefficient, and they were trying to do it on purpose to make people like use these machines. Dang it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the lady came over and she's like, "Excuse me, sir, your daughter's not allowed to touch that bottle." And like I took the bottle and I'm like, "This bottle?" And my daughter touched it, and I'm like, "She can't. She just did. What should we do?" Like, what
Yeah.
should we do? She just
Yeah.
touched it. And like you can see everybody. I'm like, I hate these machines. Like, I'm talking to you now.
Yeah.
You're a brilliant person. Like, we wouldn't even be having this problem with these machines. The whole crowd behind me was like, yeah, these machines suck. It's so crazy, man. But you know what? I think that it's a Trojan horse. And maybe I'm being way too Pollyanna here, but why can't those machines pay an income tax? Maybe they could be independent contractors. And maybe we should be taxing all those machines every transaction, and like everyone would be better off.
1099.
That would be so amazing, right?
But you bring up a brilliant point about labor and tax structures and who's doing the work in the society. And the point is, this is all changing fast, and it's all going to change even faster. And you add AI to it, and you add advanced technologies, and these things are going to change and change and change and change. So the question becomes, who are the people writing the rules for the policies around this? Who are the people writing the rules for how these things are supposed to function? Right. And my answer in the book is big corporations are writing the rules, right? They're the ones getting you to click on your subscription. They're the ones getting you to agree to how this is all going to work and function. And that's not really the representative that we need, right? That's not really where the policy making should be happening. The policy making should be happening at a government level with people who are actual public policy makers. But of course, as we've seen, that has problems of its own, right? But your point being, like, it's changing fast, and I'm not sure everyone's thrilled about it, because everybody behind you in line is saying, we hate these machines.
Yeah. I that's why I think the message in your book will resonate with so many people. It's It is changing. And maybe COVID was enough. Maybe there was enough people that became aware that it was a tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. Maybe it was a tipping point. Maybe the people that had enough is enough to break the center. And like, okay, fine. We're all going to step aside. Now what are you going to do? We're going to force people to make rules. And you can see it here in the Bay Area. Like, people are desperately trying to get people to come back to work. Like, everybody's got to come back. Come back or else. And they've moved like these threatening statements, like, come back
really
or
weird.
else.
Yeah.
Oh,
same thing in New York. It's like,
yeah.
or else. Like, or else.
Yes.
Like, what?
Or else
You're going to hire me and I'm going to go get another job. Like, what's the problem here? Like, it's more complicated than that. I realize.
I know it is.
But it is very strange to hear people, mostly who are like high executives who commute about a block and a half to go to work, or don't even come in 5 days a week, to be telling people who live 2 hours away in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Connecticut, you've got to be here every morning at 9 o'clock for 5 days a week.
Yeah. Do you see an exodus of talent happening when people are given this sort of ultimatum? Do you see the talent going, okay, I'll just go over here. I didn't really like that anyway. Do you see the talent moving away from these sort of authoritarian rules?
I don't know, because I feel like I'm not in the corporate space enough to understand the day-to-day of what this has been. I do know that we sort of went from what was it called? The great
resignation.
The Great Resignation. Thank you. From the Great Resignation to the other day, the New York Times reported about the Great Stay, which is like people are now like staying in jobs, and so other people can get to them because of the staying. So you think people have sort of moved, found new jobs. Now they're not really willing. After the election, people will feel like they have more clarity about what's coming, and they'll feel more empowered to make changes. But isn't that the rich soil of a good economy, that people do change, that people can shift jobs, that people can move around? I have my opinions about it, but I'm not an economist. So.
No, I value your opinion, and I think we're in the midst of sort of a bread and roses type revolt where. What you're seeing playing out in the media is like, oh, yeah, you guys want to stay home? Oh, yeah? Watch this. We're going to fire all of you. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah,
we're like,
now what are you going to do?
All right. We're going to actually go work for the startup over here that actually cares about the community. I'm going to volunteer at the community center. And they're like, what are you talking about?
Or I'm going to work for myself. And like, that's what I'm seeing specifically in the, like, I can speak specifically about the entertainment world, because that's my day to day. But the entertainment world, you're just seeing this bleeding happening at the major studios of talent, of money, of viewership, of most metrics. You're seeing this bleeding happening. And to some that's welcomed, to some it's not. But what the major change is, you're seeing, I think the number is now that like there were 700 TV shows on the air. Now there are 300 because the studios have cut back. It used to be that there was like 80% of production across the United States was done in Los Angeles. Now it's down to 40%. That's a really tough number for Los Angeles to swallow, and for the community of artists and production people to swallow. Because don't forget, for every face that you're seeing, there's like 100 crew behind them working really hard every day to bring you that show. Those people are suffering in a major way right now because production has been cut so much out west, and has been moving around the country and been changing, not only around the country, but it's been moving around the world as well. So when you talk about talent bleeding out, that's definitely happening in the entertainment business. And now the entire business is shifting. It used to be that like 5 years ago, you'd be like, okay, great. Like you should do a podcast, or you should go on YouTube, or you should go, now it's like, you have to do those things. And they become sort of your proving ground. And then at some point, it's not even about jumping to the studio system. It's about just like, I can go direct to consumer. I can go directly to my audience. I can go from my laptop in my house directly to the people I want to speak to. And I don't even have to deal with Hollywood, Los Angeles, or that entire monster. I can just go directly. There are benefits to that, and there are costs to that, and there are risks to that, of course. But I think there is certainly that is happening in the entertainment and media world, where even independent journalists are now saying, hey, I'm not going to necessarily put up with the rules that you're giving me. And these are very highly paid journalists. Yeah. Look at Katie Couric, right? Who left the corporate system and now has her own newsletter and her own channel across social media. She's making money. She's getting her message out, and she's not having to be told what is the right way to do it, what is the wrong way to do it. She's a seasoned journalist who's able to go direct, excuse me, I'm fitzing with my shirt, who's able to go directly to her audience. And that is a mind-blowing possibility. If you had thought about this 20 years ago, 30 years ago, who would have thought that would be possible? But it's absolutely possible.
Yeah, when you say it like that, I can't help but think of the times we live in as sort of a generational shift in coming to love yourself, or like living a life worth living. Like, and I wish people would work as hard for themselves as they do for other people or other companies, seriously. Right? It's beautiful to think, and maybe this is what it takes. Like, maybe all of this is necessary. Maybe this is what it takes for people to go, you know what? I love myself and my family way more than I love that company. I should be working as hard for me and them as I do for these other people that don't really care too much about me. Do you think that maybe that's what this is like, hey, we are becoming collectively more aware of what it means to live a life worth living?
I hope so. I really do hope so, because I think that we've never before had as many tools to make it possible. We've never before had the awareness to make it possible.
Yes.
When my dad and my grandfather look at my life, they're like, what do you do all day long? It's like, do you have a job? Like, what, and I'm very fortunate, and I've worked hard, but I've also been very privileged in the fact that, like, this is the world I've grown up in. Like, I can make a living from my laptop, and that's my life. And it allows me so much freedom and so much, such an ability to focus on and be part of the things that are really important to me. And that's just not been the case for so many generations of people. But I do think that that's what's happening. Absolutely. I mean, that there is this, I just hope it's happening more, right? I hope more and more people are realizing you can work for yourself. You can make a living by yourself. You can go out there and start anything you want in this country. It's an incredible place. For all of the criticisms that I offer in the book to our system is still producing incredible wealth for an incredible amount of people. And, I don't say that because it's about the money. I say it because it's about the opportunities, to say, you know what, I've made enough money this month to give myself 3 days off, or I've made enough, I've created enough flexibility in my calendar that on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I can go watch my daughter's dance recital, or whatever that might be for you. The goal, at least from my perspective, has always been flexibility, in order to focus on the things that I love. And I think that is more and more an opportunity for people. It takes a lot, though, right? Like, from working independently, it takes a lot of inner fortitude to be able to say, I'm going to step away from that model, and I'm going to step away from all that model offers me, and I'm going to forge into this really weird forest where I don't know where the path is, and it gets dark at night, and I'm not really sure where the health insurance is coming from. And but the good news is you figure it out, right? You figure it out. You take one step, and then you take the next step, and it starts to illuminate itself. And then you get so far into that forest and so comfortable in that forest and so happy that you get to swing from the trees sometimes that you're like, oh, you know what? I'm glad I left that. I'm glad I sort of found that inner strength to be able to walk away from that model. Again, easier said than done. Again, easy for me to say and harder for other people to do. But I think we've never before had as much opportunity either.
Julio, that is beautiful. I think that That's beautiful. And I think that that is the message that I hope people resonate with, and not only resonate with, but I hope it's contagious. And I think that that's a big part of what your book and your experience is showing people to do, is to live this life worth living, man. But as we're coming up here, you've been really, really gracious with your time, and I'm really thankful for that. And I hope
Thank
it's the
you.
first of
No,
many conversations that we continue to have. But before
happy to
I
have
let
them.
you go, yeah, me too. This is great. Where can people find you? What do you have coming up, and what are you excited about?
Sure, thanks. So most of my world centers at my website, juliovincent.com, Julio like Julio, but Julio, Julio Vincent.com. Yeah, I have a short film that just came out at Out on Film in Atlanta, which was very well received, and that was exciting. So that'll be up on my website soon. And then I have a new book that I'm working on now, and doing some writing about the experience of the last year. So I do a lot of writing on Medium. And yeah, so check out juliovincent.com for sure. I'm on social media twice a week. I keep it in my calendar. It's very sort of uh, limited, but I do it because I think it's an important way to reach people that I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly I'm sort of excited to just be having these conversations. I'm going to be speaking at South by Southwest
Nice.
in March. I think that's public tomorrow. Yeah, and I'm excited about that. Really excited about that. I was supposed to speak last year and I got sick. And so they were very gracious and extended the invitation for this year. So yeah, I get to sort of take to the stage at South by Southwest. So I'm excited about that. And I welcome these kinds of conversations. And I think we're all still feeling our way through the last 5 years. And,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know that all of us always have the answers, but at least we can share experiences and kind of help each other through. So
That's so awesome. You're going to crush it, man. And I would encourage everybody within the sound of my voice, whether you're listening to us live right now or you're listening tomorrow or 7 years from now, go down to the show notes, check out Julio's book, check out his writings. I think they're inspiring. And I think that if you read them, then you will sort of see the torch that can help you find your way through the dark forest at times and swing from the vines. I'm really thankful for it. And Julio, hang on briefly afterwards. But to everybody else within the sound of my voice, I hope you have a beautiful day. It's going to be amazing if you have the courage to change your life. Do it. We love you. That's all we got. Aloha.